Welcome to GB News Sunday. Thank you for joining us this Sunday lunchtime. I'm Emily Carver. For the next 2 hours, I will be keeping you company on TV, online and digital radio. So what have we got coming up this hour? France have endured a fifth night of violent riots, sparked, of course, by the killing of a 17-year-old boy by a police officer. The French Interior Minister says it was a calmer night. But there still were 700 people arrested, violent clashes continued, and rioters in one Paris suburb rammed a local mayor's home, firing rockets at his wife and small children. What does this tell us about the state of multiculturalism in France? And Rishi Sunak has announced a new £2.4 billion workforce plan to fix staff shortages in the NHS. More university places for medical and nursing students, apprenticeship schemes for doctors, shorter medical degrees. Is this enough to save the NHS? Is it savable? And coming up at the end of the hour, get this. Turns out that positive discrimination to help hit diversity targets in the RAF led to discrimination against white men. I'm asking, should positive discrimination just be scrapped? Please do get in touch throughout the show. Send us your thoughts on gbviews@gbnews.com or tweet me at gbnews. But before all of that, let's get the news headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
Good afternoon, it's 1:01. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. The French government will hold emergency talks this evening to address the civil unrest after a fifth night of rioting. More than 700 people were arrested across the country overnight, with tear gas used to disperse crowds in Marseille. The violence follows the death of the teenager Nahel Merzouk, who was shot by police during a traffic stop in Paris on Tuesday. In the suburbs of Paris, a mayor's home was ram-raided and set alight. His wife and one of his children were hurt. Prosecutors say an attempted murder investigation has been opened. The journalist, Peter Allen, who's in the capital, believes a state of emergency could yet be declared.
Emmanuel Macron keeps announcing extra police every night. He's up to 45,000 extra police each evening. He's going to run out of policemen soon to push out. So then he brings in the army. It's certainly a state of crisis at the moment, and his next step would probably be to introduce a state of emergency unless there's a massive change in the public consciousness and the rioting stops some other way.
Now, new measures to deal with disruptive protests come into force today. They include expanded police powers to move on static or slow-walking protests like those used by Just Stop Oil, and a new criminal offence of tunnelling. Being present in a tunnel to cause disruption could result in up to 3 years in jail. The Home Office says the move will free up officers. Suella Braverman has hit out at what she's described as mayhem on the streets. Critics, though, argue the toughening up of the laws are a threat to the right to protest. 2 people have been killed and 3 more are in a critical condition after a mass shooting in the US state of Maryland. Police say up to 30 people suffered gunshot wounds in the incident, which took place in the city of Baltimore, where people had gathered for an event called Brooklyn Day. Nothing is yet known about the shooter or a possible motive. The government's determined to stop migrant boats coming into Britain. That's what the Health Secretary has said. It comes days after the Prime Minister refused to guarantee the first flight to Rwanda would take off by the end of the year, after his asylum policy was dealt a blow by an appeal court ruling. Steve Barclay says if nothing's done to stop the boats, the cost to deport migrants could reach up to £11 billion. He's added he thinks it's the right decision to take the Rwanda policy to the Supreme Court.
I think your viewers want the government to take action. That is what we're doing. We're doing so in a way that clearly complies with the legal process. But it's important we now take this to the Supreme Court. The Prime Minister, the Home Secretary are determined to stop the boats. And if we don't, then there'll be a huge cost.
However, Lord Carlisle, barrister and crossbench member of the House of Lords, says the proposal is unlawful.
Government is not upholding the law, and they've approached this whole bill in a completely legally non-compliant way. The basis of this bill is that there is a safe country or safe countries to send refugees to, but in fact they're only offering one safe country, and that's Rwanda. So the proposal is in tatters, it is unlawful, it is leading to people being kept in custody when they should not be kept in custody.
Labour says it would give teachers in England £2,400 to stop them leaving the profession. The party's promising £50 million a year to prevent what it calls an exodus. It would be funded by ending tax breaks for private schools. Nearly 1 in 5 teachers who qualified in 2020 have since quit. Shadow Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson says the problem needs to be addressed.
For our new teachers, when they've completed their early career framework, when they finish those 2 years, they would then receive a retention payment at the end of that. The single biggest way that we make sure that children get really great outcomes and get a great start in life in school is through high quality teaching. And right now at the moment we face a recruitment and retention crisis across the profession. People are leaving teaching in their droves. 1 in 5 new teachers leave within the first couple of years. And that's why I believe it's absolutely essential that we address that.
There will be more disruption for rail passengers over the coming week. ASLEF members at 16 train companies in England will refuse to work overtime. Operators rely on overtime to run their full timetable. The union says it's calling for fair pay, but the rail delivery group says ASLEF rejected its last offer of a £5,000 raise, which would bring the basic salary for drivers working a 4-day week to nearly £65,000. Services will be affected until Saturday. And this is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. But now it is back to Emily and GB News Sunday.
Thank you very much, Aaron. So, as you heard in the bulletins, more than 700 people have been arrested in France. That's following a 5th night of rioting. Tear gas was used to disperse crowds in Marseille. Police clashed with protesters late into the night. Rioters in one Paris suburb rammed the local mayor's home, firing rockets at his wife and small children. That's what the police have said. This historic violence follows, of course, the death of teenager Nahel Mazouk, who was shot by police during a traffic stop in Paris on Tuesday. So joining me now from France is political broadcaster at Le Journal du Dimanche, Antonin André. I think I've got that right. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. Now, I read that the Interior Minister in France said it was a calmer night, but as I just read out, there were a huge number of arrests, and of course there was the incident with a local mayor in Paris. Can you tell me more?
Yes, the situation was a little less violent than the other night, but there are still a lot of riots in some points. Not in every city. There is less cities who are impacted by the riots, and the riots are less important because policemen made more arrestation before riot can spread everywhere. But there is one fact is very worried. It's a mayor of a town, La Haye-les-Roses. His family were attacked in his house during the night, and his wife and his 2 children had to left the house in emergency because there was fire in the house. And this is what is a very shocking thing this morning. And every mayors in France wants that the state and Emmanuel Macron take more measures to stop the chaos.
And of course, France is a top tourist destination for British people. I've lived in France, actually, and spent quite a lot of time there. This isn't the first time that we've seen clashes between those of Algerian descent and the French police, is it?
It's not only a problem of immigration, all of that stuff, like everybody wants to tell it, but it's more than there are several rioters. There are young people from the suburbs, but there are also, we have seen in France some right extremist militant that leads riots in some cities. So it's very confusing to know exactly who is behind the rioters every day. And what is clear is that tourism is very impacted by this chaos in France, and we have the Olympic Games next year. So it's a great problem for French authorities, because the picture that you show and that is shown in every TV in the world is for France very, very difficult to manage.
Yes, it's very distressing for British people to see these images coming from France, our closest neighbour. There's been a lot of commentary about what this tells us about France. It appears to be a tinderbox in some ways, in terms of race relations, perhaps. What can this tell us, what's happened over the last 5 days? What can this tell us about the state of race relations in France?
France, you know, it's difficult to qualify this. There is in France a lot of anger because we had a lot of contestation this month about the retreats reform, and we have a political situation which is very difficult to very dominated by the extremists. You have the extreme right with Marine Le Pen and extreme left with Jean-Luc Mélenchon, and both of them are trying to take the opportunity of these riots to make their own business, you know. And it's very difficult because Emmanuel Macron is very alone. He's so alone, and there is two extremist parties who are blowing on the fire. So it's difficult.
Attempting to capitalise, perhaps. I mean, for those listening on the radio, we're looking at images across France, I believe. I'm not sure if this is Paris, but seeing bins alight, seeing people looting shops. It does look, looking at these images, it does look close to a war zone. It is quite tragic to see. So you mentioned far left and the far right. Is Marine Le Pen capitalising from this? What has she been saying in response to this this outbreak of violence?
You know, Marine Le Pen, she's always saying, if I were in the power, I would do that, I would do that. You have to do this, you have to do that. But in reality, she has not already a plan to take back the situation, and she's not a solution on issue. But you know, she's in the opposition, so she can blow on the fire and tell everything she wants because she's not in charge. So it's for her, it's all benefits, and that's what is very dangerous, and why Emmanuel Macron has to do something, because the more the riots are during, the more Marine Le Pen will grow in the polls and in the opinion, but she has not a lot of solution. You know, she's just saying that it is immigration, that it is violence, that policemen are not support enough, but it's just incantation, it's just prayers, but not a very deep solution or very real solutions.
OK, thank you very much indeed for joining us from France. Antonin André, they're a French journalist. Well, I'd like to bring in my panel on this. We've been discussing this over the past few days, and I have with me Aaron Bastani from Novara Media and also Darren Grimes, GB News presenter and fantastic political commentator. So, listening to what the French journalist there had to say, Darren, one of the conversations that obviously has come out of this is, would this happen here? Is this a problem specific to France and the way that they manage multiculturalism, that a shooting, an unlawful shooting, from what we understand, has been able to, well, snowball into extreme riots across the country?
Well, from what I understand it, the young lad was told in a car, don't drive off or you'll be shot, and the young lad drove off. If a police officer tells me not to drive off, otherwise I'll be shot, you damn well be sure I wouldn't drive off. So I think there's a certain element there.
One would say that he should not have shot anyway, in any case.
Yes, but equally, you obey the law, right? That police officer has a weapon for a reason, and I'm afraid the law wasn't followed here. So a lot of people are saying, well, hang on a minute, you know, if you're going to break the law, there are going to be repercussions. I accept that may not lead to the loss of life, but still, he broke the law. Now, on the point there about whether or not it'll happen here, we've seen disputes on the streets of London over Iran, for example, people pro the regime, people against the regime. We've seen in Leicester disputes between Muslim communities and other communities. And you start to think, why are we importing these problems into Britain, into the streets of Britain, and making things here in this country a drama where none need exist. That's where people start to see similarities between what's happening in France and what's happening in this country. And that's where I think we should be concerned that perhaps something could happen like it did in 2011 again.
Aaron, do you think there's any country that manages multiculturalism well? Do you think that France has specific problems? We know that the banlieue are highly segregated. We know there are people of North African descent, former colonies, living in estates outside of the main city centre.
Yeah.
And there's clearly huge grievances.
Yeah. Well, I think Britain does pretty well. I think we do a damn sight better than France. Just a few points with regards to what that gentleman said. I thought he didn't really say anything of interest. It's really important to say Emmanuel Macron
Poor Antonin.
he called this shooting, the president, inexplicable and inexcusable.
Yes.
And then that gentleman from Journal de Dimanche is saying that, this is about the extremes polarising debate. The President Macron, has said this was inexcusable. And I think that's a really important point to make.
And you think that's not the right thing to say?
I do think it's the right thing to say.
People are burning up their own towns and cities.
No, he said the killing was inexcusable.
Oh, right, of course, yes.
So, and it's also important to say this police officer is... It seems right now he'll be facing murder charges.
Yeah.
He's been put in pre-trial detention. This is a very serious matter. Now, I'm not saying that excuses any of this, but I would have thought for a French journalist commenting on this, to not even mention that, I find quite striking, frankly, because that's what's catalysed all of this. In terms of could it happen here, I think the big difference between us and France is that they have 20% youth unemployment. And 20% youth unemployment, obviously, younger people tend to be more ethnically diverse because of high birth rates. That's true here as well, of course, but it's very much the case over in France. So you've got much higher than 20% unemployment amongst overwhelmingly, we would call them BAME people in this country, in larger cities. That is a tinderbox. And we don't have the same thing here. Look, the Tories have got many things wrong over the last 13 years. Youth unemployment isn't one of them.
I think it runs deeper than the question of poverty and unemployment. I think that is obviously a huge issue and will be one of the reasons why people are willing, who don't feel like they've got a stake in society, quite clearly. But Darren, I do think, and I've spoken to many French people about this, I've lived in France, there is a sense among some minority communities that they don't feel fully French. Is that the fault of the French government and their policies, which tend to be more assimilate or nothing? Or is that the consequence, is that just natural consequence of having immigrant populations in your country?
I don't think, looking at the scenes that we're seeing on screen for our radio listeners, 12 to 13-year-olds, Emily, have been arrested for arson, right?
Yeah,
they're not included in employment figures, right? You can't say it's youth unemployment
the bedrock of what's happening is clearly not 12 to 13-year-olds, is it, Darren?
There are many of them on the streets there, burning bins and doing all the rest of it.
Young men.
And actually, if we look at those images there, I think it shows that this is clearly a community, an entire group of people who are saying, I'm going to use this as an excuse to rob, to steal, to loot, to burn, to destroy. And actually, I don't think there can ever be any justification for that. But you've had your own experience in France, where you've seen communities that have been almost ghettoised, right? Where they are on the outskirts of Paris, basically far removed from society, from day-to-day life. But on that fundamental point of saying, is it France's fault for saying, take it or leave it? What do we expect France to say? Do we expect France to bend to cultures and societies around the world, or do we expect France to be France? If you want to live in France, of course you should expect to adopt French culture.
I feel like we're talking at cross purposes here, because I'm not suggesting you shouldn't. But what I'm saying is, I was asked, what's the difference between France and Britain? I don't think this could happen in Britain because of the economic conditions for younger people. Now, what you just said about integration and so on, all hugely important. But when a young man is 29, he's married, he has a child, he has a house, has a mortgage, he's obviously a lot less likely to go around burning stuff, OK? So I agree with you to an extent, but I don't think it's an either-or here. And look, I'm half Iranian. The idea that my father would come to this country and then I would do something like burn a building clearly is unacceptable.
Well, on that note, thank you very much indeed. That was a great conversation, I think. Lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts at home. Johnny has to say, over 2,000 people have been arrested. I hope they make an example of every single one, otherwise this will only get worse. Jane says, the French mayor has said that violent protesters have tried to assassinate his family What's it got to do with them? It's time to call in the army. Well, that's very interesting you say that, because there are people calling for the army to take over the government, which of course would be something that would never really happen in this country. But of course, France has a very different history, one of revolution. And Sarah says, we've had many riots in the UK over the last few decades, Brixton riots and so on, but nothing compared to what I am seeing over in France. Yes, I've seen people compare this to 2011, where we saw riots break out in London, move to other cities, but this does seem to be on another level. And of course, many more police officers are armed in France, and also many more people on the streets seem to be armed in France. Louise says, France is on fire, we must do something to help. None of this violence can be justified. Not sure what we can do to help, apart from solidarity, perhaps. Please do keep your views coming in. Of course, you're watching and listening to GB News Sunday with me, Emily Carver. We've got lots more coming up on today's show. The Prime Minister has unveiled his plans to reform the health service, at least when it comes to addressing staff shortages. Is more staff enough to save the NHS? How are we all going to pay for it? All of that and more to come. I'm Emily Carver. You're watching and listening to GB News, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive, because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News,
the people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Sunday with me, Emily Carver, on your TV, online and radio. So the Prime Minister has unveiled plans to reform the health service. The 15-year NHS plan sets out measures to plug a black hole of up to 360,000 staff. He's going to do this by creating a pool of junior and apprentice roles that will help speed up clinical training. The strategy is the first long-term workforce initiative for the health service and is backed by a staggering £2.4 billion. But can an NHS on life support be saved? To discuss this further, I'm now joined by GP and Chair of Coventry Local Medical Committee, Dr Gavin Shields. Thank you very much, Doctor, for joining me. Let me just get your take on what we've heard from the government and from NHS England, because this is NHS England's plan, isn't it, rather than the government's plan?
Yes, that's right. Well, the take on it, this is a large, ambitious plan for increasing recruitment and training of staff in the NHS. We're aware that, and let's give it credit, it does recognise that we have a fundamental problem. We are over 100,000 colleagues short in the NHS at the moment, and that's likely to rise up to about 350,000 over the next decade or so. So it does recognise that we have a serious problem due to failures of funding going back over the last 10, 15 years. It is ambitious, it is important, and it does recognise the importance of staff. But I do have a lot of concerns about it. I mean, first of all, we need some urgent support now. This is a very long-term plan. And also in the NHS, we've all seen so many changes and reforms come and go with different governments that I would really want a commitment of some cross-party support of continuity of this plan, because what we don't want is a recruitment plan that then gets overturned by other governments. It also doesn't do enough to address retention.
Well, Gavin, I mean, Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Minister, he's given it his support. I think he said it's nice that they've done what Labour's been calling on the government to do. What do you mean in terms of urgent support now? Are you talking about retention of staff that are thinking about leaving? Are you talking about recruiting from abroad? What could the government actually do right now that would, well, reduce the waiting lists, that would make the NHS work for us?
I think there's a number of things. First of all, it's retention, because this is an ongoing plan. It's going to take a long time to recruit this staff and to train this staff. We've got to stop staff leaving. Now, staff are leaving for many reasons. One of those is pay, and this really doesn't address that issue at all. If colleagues training and coming off training in the NHS realise they can get better pay and safer working conditions abroad, it's very, very difficult persuading them to stay. So we are hemorrhaging staff, and that needs to change. The other thing is we really do need, alongside a staff plan, a long-term plan with estates and a long-term plan with support for that. We're bursting at the seams. Where are we going to put all these extra staff? Who's going to be doing the mentoring and support? It's going to be taking senior doctors out of the patient-facing care to support and train this extra staff. All of this needs to be thought through and worked through as plans together. If you just look at the staff numbers, that's a start, but without the estates, without the extra support for training, and without the proper retention, this really is going to start to unravel, I'm afraid.
Well, thank you very much for talking us through that and giving your view. That is Dr. Gavin Shields, a GP and also chair of Coventry Local Medical Committee. Need urgent help now, as well as this workforce plan. But I think what he said about cross-party consensus is really, really important. I've got my panel back with me. Aaron, I read an article, you were listening to what the doctor had to say, but I read an article here. UK doctors lured to Australia with ads promising £130,000 salary and days off to swim and surf. I don't know if you're a TikTok user, but the ads are coming thick and fast. I don't know why they're targeting me, but they seem to be. They want our nurses, they want our doctors, God knows what else. Yep. How can the NHS, you know, retain more staff and prevent them from going off to the sunny climate of Australia?
It's a great question. We are 112,000 people short, I think. It's about 50,000 nurses. And it's not just Australia, it's Canada, it's the US, it's the Gulf states too. We've got a similar problem, albeit significantly smaller, with teachers.
Teachers.
These are bedrock professions and occupations without which you can't really have a country. Whether or not we have a public healthcare system, private healthcare system, you need nurses and doctors. So it is deeply concerning. For me, the low-hanging fruit with nurses is I would scrap tuition fees and I would scrap student debt. You've got nurses now graduating with on average around £50,000 worth of debt. I just find it completely absurd. I mean, maybe in the short term you might be able to scrap their repayments, or you might give them 0% interest, or, you know, lower their interest rate. I think in the very short term, like, you know, next month.
On that point, sorry to interrupt,
Please.
but older nurses that I speak to, people who've been in the profession for years and years and years, do say, why on earth do nurses even need degrees?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is, to be fair, this is part
But apparently that's like a controversial, massively controversial thing to say, and it's diminishing the role. But actually, you know, the amount of debt, the amount of time, it's really difficult for people who are in their older years with already families to take all that time off.
Yeah, well, I mean, part of this is interesting, right? And I actually think these reforms are really, really good. You know, I won't clip that because I won't say it very often about, Rishi Sunak. But, the fact that medical degrees will be shorter, there'll be more apprenticeships, so it goes to what you're saying, really. And if we can have, maybe nurses need 1 year of university education alongside apprenticeships. I don't know. I'm not speculating on what precisely we should do. But I think that's part of the issue, for sure. But we need to think about incentives for nurses right now because they're just very low to stay in this country.
Yeah, I think you're right, Darren. Looking at the bigger picture, there on the TV screen, our big question, can the NHS be saved? I want to ask you whether it's worth saving. Should we be looking at improving it in bigger ways? Rishi Sunak says this is radical reform. Is it?
We're being told time and again, Emily, you hear it on this channel a lot, which is this line, we've got to do X for the NHS. Well, actually, I don't live for the NHS, right? I live to, be with my family. I live for our Lord and Saviour, not for a healthcare system. And I find that extraordinary. So I think we've got to change the narrative. And the only way you can do that is by reforming the system itself. We're seeing people go to Australia because they've got lower taxes, they've got better living conditions. This country, now it's working, let's be honest. It's a joke, it's a farce. And Rishi Sunak says, actually, not as many people are going to Australia as we are led to believe, but I say even a few is too many, given the chronic shortages that we're actually facing. Now, a system that actually had reform, and I'm not talking about the American system, before some clever sod tweets in and says, Darren Grimes, you're trying to turn us into the United States, you want to sell us to Donald Trump, remember all that? What I'm saying is, we want to look to Europe for once.
I do remember that, selling the NHS to Donald Trump, and the obvious answer to that was, would he want to buy it? I don't think so, but sorry, very quickly, Darren.
A 5-day strike, doctors are going on a 5-day strike as well, Emily. They're going to Australia and all the rest of it. I think we need to look at the fact that we're training up all of these people at vast expense to the taxpayer, and more needs to be done to actually keep them here.
Well, there we go. You are watching and listening to GB News Sunday. Let me know what you think about that. Is the NHS savable? Is it worth saving? Is there an alternative? But we've got lots more coming up on today's show too. Hundreds of miles of overhead cables and pylons are expected to be fast-tracked. That's in a bid to meet Britain's net zero targets. Is net zero now expensive and ugly? What is the best move for Sunak? But first, let's get the news with Aaron Armstrong.
Good afternoon to you. It's 1:32. Let's get you up to date with the headlines from the GB Newsroom. The French government will hold emergency talks later to address the civil unrest after a fifth night of rioting with violent clashes in Marseille. And more than 700 people were arrested yesterday following looting and demonstrations in a number of other cities, and almost 2,500 people have been arrested in total. The riots began after police shot and killed teenager Nahel Merzouk during a traffic stop in Paris on Tuesday. Police will have new powers to deal with environmental activists that come into force today. They'll have greater ability to move on static protests, and demonstrators could be charged with the new criminal offence of tunnelling that's being present in a tunnel to cause disruption, which carries with it up to 3 years in jail. Home Secretary Suella Braverman says the new measures are necessary to deal with mayhem on the streets. Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion say it threatens their right to protest. Labour says it would give teachers in England £2,400 to stop them leaving the profession. The party's promising £50 million a year to prevent what it calls an exodus, and they'd fund it by ending tax breaks for private schools. Nearly 1 in 5 teachers who qualified 3 years ago have since quit. The Shadow Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson says the problem has to be addressed. Rail passengers are facing further disruption over the next week. ASLEF members at 16 train companies in England will refuse to work overtime. Operators rely on that to run their full timetable. The union says it's calling for fair pay. The Rail Delivery Group says ASLEF rejected its last offer of a £5,000 raise, which would bring the basic salary for drivers working a 4-day week to nearly £65,000. Services will be affected from tomorrow through to Saturday. That's it for the moment. We'll be back with more in our later programmes, or there's more on our website, gbnews.com.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions, and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio, and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Welcome back to GB News Sunday with me, Emily Carver, on your TV, online and radio. Now, I just got an email from a Carol who's written in. She's grumpy with what I've said. She says, "How dare you, Emily Carver, ask if the NHS is worth saving? You want to pay private, crack on." Well, I wasn't saying that we should turn into a US-style private system where nobody gets healthcare unless they can pay through the nose for it. I was just saying, you know, open our eyes, maybe look at other healthcare systems that are working more. We've seen so many UK doctors and nurses move to Australia. What are they doing there that's better? I think they've got a mixed system, a system of social insurance topped up by the government, so it's still universal. But perhaps it's a little bit more efficient. Anyway, lots of you have agreed with me too, so we'll see. But we're moving on to, pylons. Despite local opposition, hundreds of miles of overhead pylons and cables are expected to be fast-tracked in a bid to meet Britain's net zero targets. Of course, ministers are concerned the growing demand for energy could outpace the national grid capacity as households switch to electric cars and heat pumps. I think we all saw this coming. Now, the news comes, of course, as outgoing Minister Zac Goldsmith attacked Rishi Sunak. He accused him of being uninterested in the environment. So joining me now to discuss all of this is Head of Policy at Net Zero Watch, Harry Wilkinson. We've also got Senior Meteorologist at British Weather Services, Jim Dale, and also the Director of the Climate Media Coalition, Donica McCarthy. Thank you very much indeed, all of you, for joining me. Should we start with Net Zero Watch? Harry, what do you think of these pylons? Is net zero now an eyesore as well as being terribly expensive? Is that fair to say?
I think so. This is an inevitable feature of net zero. We're moving towards far less energy dense sources, when it comes to wind turbines, they need to be spread out over a large area. You need thousands of installations to provide the same amount of energy that one power plant, whether that was gas or nuclear, would have provided beforehand. So that means a huge amount of new infrastructure. We also need to expand massively the amount of electricity we're actually producing if we're going to get all the heating demand moved from gas boilers to heat pumps. We'll need that much more electricity. All the electric vehicles will need electricity as well. So this is an enormous challenge. And I think National Grid is just reflecting that by saying, unless you can actually force through these pylons through the planning system, they won't get built in time.
Donica, is Harry being a little bit defeatist there? If we want to move to a greener and cleaner planet, we're going to have to put up with the electricity and using more electricity from renewable sources, which means we need more pylons.
The first point you made there is that net zero is more expensive. It's not. Renewable energy is significantly cheaper than fossil fuels. This winter, we've had to pour tens of billions, £67 billion into subsidising fossil fuels at enormous cost to the British taxpayer. Secondly, you mentioned in your introduction the issue about Rishi Sunak. Rishi Sunak and condemnation by Zach Goldsmith was absolutely bang on the button, except I would go farther and say Rishi Sunak is not only not interested in tackling climate change, he's actually turbocharging fossil fuel destruction. He is pouring billions of tax cuts into North Sea oil, and he's taxing renewables. He has cut the money invested for people's home energy efficiency, leaving 9 million people in fuel poverty this winter as fossil fuel prices soared, and he's continuing the ban on onshore winds. This is a government in crisis because Rishi Sunak at the top of it is absolutely symbolic of the billionaire class destroying our planet.
Well, strong stuff. Jim, I'll bring you in. Is it true to say that renewables are cheaper than fossil fuels? Take away the politics of it, take away climate change. Is that true as a fact, as it stands in the UK right now?
Well, look, renewables is all about an evolution, not a revolution. We've been talking about renewables and incorporating them. I say we've been incorporating them. I just agree entirely with your last guest in terms of what he actually said. In Britain, we've gone on a snail's pace, in fact, going backwards and organising licences for new coal and oil licences in drilling around. So as far as this government is concerned, we have been going backwards. And let's make this clear. The reason Zach Goldsmith did what he did within the letter, a 2-page letter, and it appeared to me to be very angry at this government, is for exact those reasons. They talk a good story, but they actually go nowhere fast. And we're waiting in this country. In fact, getting behind other countries such as China and other countries as far as the green revolution is concerned. We've got to speed these things up. We've got to invest. I'll just quote this to you. Deloitte, who are the financial risk consultants, we probably all know about them. They're not run-of-the-mill or anything. They calculate that if we don't have a transition to net zero, it's going to cost the world $178 trillion over the next 50 years. And on the other side of the coin, if we do, and as I say, it's by evolution, not revolution, then the plus side of that is plus 4 trillion. So to me, this is common sense. And I think that's what we're trying to get across to viewers.
Harry, do you recognise that $178 trillion figure there? It sounds very impressive, sounds a very large number indeed. What do you say to that?
Well, people will have their different calculations, but I just have to come back against what some of the other guests were saying. Zach Goldsmith is on a different planet. The fact is that net zero is a huge element of what this government is doing. Britain has reduced its emissions by about 50% since 1990. We've gone further than most countries. We've seen wages stagnate for the last decade or more. Britain is failing economically. We've got to turbocharge the economy, and we're not going to do that if we say no to new oil and gas, as people like Zach Goldsmith and the other guests have been saying. If we do that, prices will be higher. We've seen an energy crisis. People have been paying far too much for their energy bills, and people are saying we should turn off new North Sea oil and gas altogether. If we do that, we will see prices higher than they need to be. A transition is to a more diverse range of supplies is not a bad thing in itself. But if we ban alternatives, if we ban oil and gas, then we will see prices skyrocket and we'll see ordinary people suffer. I don't think Zach Goldsmith is right in saying we're not providing leadership. If we copy people like the United States and the EU, they just want to shovel more and more subsidies into various technologies. That won't actually yield the results that they desire because, it's competition, it's consumer choice that will reveal the technologies of the future that can actually get emissions down. So we shouldn't be copying those countries. We should be doing an approach based on competition and choice. And I think hopefully the government's moving towards that.
Donica, last word to you, and then we have to wrap up.
Yeah, the idea that actually pouring billions into new fossil fuels on the offshore of Britain will reduce costs in Britain is a lie, which would have to nationalise the oil companies to bring down prices. Green energy, onshore wind, insulation reduces people's bills, and this guy is funded by American oil billionaires. No wonder he's on GB News promoting oil and gas. It's absolutely outrageous.
Hang on, Donica, are you saying that Harry does not believe what he is saying? Because that's dangerous territory there.
I'm actually saying that he will not reveal who his American oil billionaire funders are. And it's time that Britain stood up to these secret think tanks that are funded by...
Well, hang on, Donica. Donica, we have to wrap up, but I would just remind you that it was Keir Starmer who was getting in hot water with the trade unions over oil and gas jobs. The industry was saying, well, hang on, all of these jobs are going to go if you stop new exploration of oil and gas. And I would just say, just as a final point, even if we had zero carbon emissions in this country, unfortunately, it would have absolutely no impact on the global temperature because of other countries and their industries. But anyway, on that note, thank you very much indeed, all of you, for joining me. Sorry I didn't get a chance to come back to you, Jim, but we'll speak again, I'm sure. Thank you very much indeed, Jim Dale, who is a meteorologist at British Weather Services, Harry Wilkinson at Net Zero Watch, and Donica McCarthy at the Climate Media Coalition. There's a bit of 2 against 1 there with Harry, so I thought I'd pipe up. Who should I go to first? Darren.
Honestly, there is no topic in British politics that angers me more than the net zero debate.
Go on, get on your soapbox.
The idea that Harry, right, if Just Stop Oil gave Harry Wilkinson from Net Zero Watch £1 billion, he's not going to all of a sudden say net zero is the best thing since sliced bread.
I don't know, maybe for $1 billion.
So that's a totally spurious lie. But listen, these heat pumps thing, there is evidence to suggest that you'd get more hot air if we just bottled it from the House of Commons than you would installing these expensive things into drafty older homes. So
you're talking about heat pumps?
Heat pumps.
Yes.
So if we actually rely on these things, these so-called new technologies, which actually aren't very new at all, right? The idea that behind heat pumps has been around some time. The idea behind storing energy through windmills, that's been around for some time as well. And you can't store the energy. So guess what? Bill payers at home may not be aware that £200 for most bill payers is going into Scotland to encourage the owners of wind turbines to switch them off when it's too windy because we can't actually store the energy from these things. Same story with solar panels. When it's too hot, they're less efficient. And £170 in green levies is coming back to hit British taxpayers. Meanwhile, China is burning more coal than Sauron's Mordor. It is obscene. It is grotesque what we're doing to working families in this country.
Well, there you go, often forgotten, the bill payers. Aaron, would you concede, I know you're on board with the net zero stuff, and I'm sure for very good, well-meaning reasons, but would you concede that there is quite a lot of virtue signalling to some of our policies in terms of the fact that even if, as I said before, even if we did cut down our emissions to zero, it wouldn't have any impact globally?
Well, that's a collective action problem. You can say that about pretty much every country except, Russia, China, the US, and so on. I think we could have very easily 100% of our electricity come from non-carbon sources. if you include nuclear. And I think that's very easy, and I think it's very doable, and we could...
But people on the left were adamant that they didn't want nuclear.
I'm pro-nuclear, so you know, I'm a bit of a weirdo there. I'm pro-nuclear. But you started this with the pylons, and one of your guests spoke about growth.
Yes, I thought it was a nice segue.
Yeah, but look, the thing is, we had the first pylon in this country in 1928, and I think there is so much infrastructure we take for granted today which wouldn't be built because of NIMBYs. Oh, we can't do this, we can't do that. There's this newt that nobody's ever heard of over here. This person with their mega estate will be upset. And I think, look, we're in a bad situation in this country if people are saying we can't build pylons, which is something we've been building for 95 years. So you want to talk about net zero and growth, let's talk about NIMBYs and growth, because I think they're a bigger problem.
I think that's a very good point. And if they're simply easing planning laws that usually take 7 odd years to decide where a pylon's going to be situated, then that's no good. But there is also the question of destroying our countryside, and England isn't very big, is it? So these things do, you know, create eyesores. But hey, we need electricity.
Would you get rid of all the pylons we already have then?
I would not get rid of all the pylons.
Nature.
But you at home, let me know, would you get rid of the pylons? No, that's a silly question. But we're going to be moving on. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts on Rishi Sunak's NHS reform plans. Annette has to say, she said, more money will not improve the NHS. It's inefficient and a waste. We need a complete overhaul. I think a bit more money probably would improve it, but it wouldn't make it as efficient as we need, and it wouldn't make it a world-class health system, in my view. Janine says, we have tried and failed on many occasions to save the NHS, but it cannot be saved. Angela says, I've been working in the NHS for over 25 years and with my current employer for over 13. I've had no issue with my salary, the lack of funding, lack of staff, or increasing workload pressures. Well, you sound like the perfect employee. Please do keep your views coming in. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter. We're at GB News. So moving on swiftly, this week it was revealed that the use of affirmative action or positive discrimination to help hit diversity targets in the RAF, the Royal Air Force, led to discrimination against, guess who? White men. So positive discrimination has once again led to negative discrimination, in this case, unlawful discrimination against white men in favour of women and ethnic minorities. We've also seen in the States this week that the US Supreme Court has ruled that race can no longer be considered a factor in university applications. That's a very interesting step indeed. So should the UK follow suit? I'm asking, should positive discrimination be scrapped altogether? Darren?
Well, yes, of course it should, because ultimately it's racism. It is racist to say that white men, straight white males and all the rest of it can't be accepted, even if they're the best person for the job. It is plain and simple to me. There is nothing more racist than that notion. I also, you know, yesterday, Emily, it was announced by another broadcaster, a less pristine one than ours.
Less prestigious as well.
Military families given 2 weeks' notice to leave accommodation for migrants. It just strikes me that in this country, the armed forces and those who want to join it are being given a pretty rum deal when actually they're some of the bravest, most brilliant people that we should respect and cherish. So no, I would get rid of positive discrimination outright. It's not positive at all. It couldn't be more negative.
I think, Aaron, you like a bit of positive discrimination.
Do I? Well, it's unlawful. That's the point. The reason why this has been found, you know, we're talking about it, is because it's unlawful under the Equalities Act. You can, if you have 2 equal candidates of the same calibre, you can in that instance do it. But you can't say when you're employing, sorry, we're only going to employ brown or black people or a woman. If you do that, it's unlawful.
If Darren and I turned up to your organisation, both for the same job, same qualifications, same everything, would you pick me over him? Because I'm a woman.
You know, you're LGBT, so actually,
it would be a tricky one.
In the oppression Olympics,
then it gets a bit complicated.
We're in trouble. So you know, it is unlawful.
That's why it's a nonsense, though.
Well, what I would say
it's an oppression Olympics.
I said that flippantly, by the way. I think in the media or in law, you know, I think it's important to have certain professions reflect society more generally. I think that's really useful. But I don't see why one arm of the armed forces, i.e. the Air Force, has to have 20% of its staff being BAME. It just seems quite strange and...
But this is what's happened with all of the diversity and inclusion, ticking a box. I don't know if you've looked at application forms for the civil service and other public sector jobs, but before you even apply. Before you even send in your CV, you have to go through about 20 million questions. That's an exaggeration, by the way. 20 million questions about your ethnicity, about your sexuality. Are you trans? Are you whatever? And it's, for goodness sake, do we really need this in Britain in 2023? We have a multi-ethnic country now. We have a country with lots of different religions. There are very many ethnic groups that are doing better than the white British population. I mean, do we need this?
I mean, looking at the whole ESG debate that we had on the Saturday 5 last night, Emily, it's actually seeping into even the closure of bank accounts, because people sat in banks are saying, well, this person has said X and therefore it's a risky business, let's not have them on board. So it's seeping into every avenue of our lives and making Britain worse, in my opinion. Look, if you are a successfully talented, gay, neurodiverse black person and you're right for the job, perfect, hunky-dory, happy days. But you shouldn't receive the job purely because of your immutable characteristics, because that, in my view, is racism, plain and simple.
Do you think it's a free-for-all when it comes to white males? You can criticise them as much as you like. It's almost like it's a bit, well, it's a bit old-fashioned to be a white male. No one's there to support you anymore.
I think younger white men have it really hard because, of course, we talk about the patriarchy and all these things, white privilege, etc. The beneficiaries of that are obviously very old. Society's changed, and my wife's pregnant. God willing, it's fine. But we've got a daughter on the way. I do think that younger men...
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you very much. I do think younger men have it really hard. And I think this is something that, whether you're right, left, liberal, whatever, we need a sensible conversation about that because people are being drawn to the likes of Andrew Tate or Jordan Peterson for a reason. That's a symptom.
Maybe you need to hire more white men from working-class backgrounds. But you're not allowed to discriminate in favour of white working class. There was that school that tried to do it, or someone tried to... Anyway, we'll come back to that. That's all we've got time for.
We need more working class.
I'm being told that we must move on. I have a response, I believe. The new Chief of the Royal Air Force has apologised for all of this that's gone on. He said that at the time the practice was believed to be acceptable, positive action based on the understanding of the recruitment process and interpretation of legal advice. He went on to say, "We now know that it did not, and I apologise unreservedly to all those affected." He added that the RAF accepts that some men were discriminated against. The group of 31 individuals who likely missed the opportunity to qualify for a £5,000 joining bonus are said to have been identified and have been offered the award. I do wonder if it's happening elsewhere, though. Well, I'm sure we'll find out. You're watching and listening to GB News Sunday with me, Emily Carver. We've got plenty more coming up in the next hour, so stay tuned. I'm Emily Carver. You're watching and listening to GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point.
And action.
Sergeant, the big read, my superstar panel, they're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome to GB News Sunday. Thank you for joining us this lunchtime. I'm Emily Carver. For the next hour, I'll be keeping you company on TV, online and radio. So coming up this hour, new measures to crack down on disruptive protests are coming into force today. Authorities will now have powers to disperse static protests. That's a common tactic of groups like Just Stop Oil, Extinction Rebellion, and so on. Is this the end for large-scale zealot groups, or do you think this is an infringement on our civil liberties? Then, are we running out of money? Households across the country have withdrawn record amounts of their savings in the month of May. This paired with record amounts of personal borrowing as well. I'm asking, are we simply running out of cash? And the ongoing legal battle over the government's flagship immigration policy rages on, doesn't it? The government insisted it will challenge the ruling that sending refugees to Rwanda was unlawful. Now Suella Braverman says they'll do whatever it takes to stop the boats. Who do you blame for its failure so far, the Rwandan scheme failure? The government or the courts? Get in touch on all of that. Send us your thoughts on gbviews at gbnews.com. Tweet me at gbnews. But first, let's get the news headlines with Aaron.
Good afternoon to you. It is 2 minutes past 2. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. The French government will hold emergency talks this evening to address the civil unrest after a fifth night of riots. More than 700 people were arrested across the country overnight, with tear gas used to disperse crowds in Marseille. Now, the violence follows the death of teenager Nahel Merzouk, who was shot by police on Tuesday. In Paris, a murder investigation's been opened after a mayor's home was ram-raided and set alight. His wife and one of his children were hurt. The French journalist Antonin André says it's put more pressure on the president, Emmanuel Macron.
His family were attacked in his house during the night, and his wife and his two children had to left the house in emergency because there was fire in the house. And this is what is a very shocking thing this morning. And every mayors in France wants that the state and Emmanuel Macron take more measures to stop the chaos.
2 people have been killed and 3 are in a critical condition after a mass shooting in the US state of Maryland. Police say up to 30 people suffered gunshot wounds during the attack, which took place in the city of Baltimore. People had gathered for an event called Brooklyn Day. Nothing is yet known about the attacker or a possible motive. New measures to deal with disruptive protests have come into force. They include expanded police powers to move on static or slow walking protests like those used by Just Stop Oil. It will now be a criminal offence to tackle disruption in tunnels. That's been introduced, carrying jail terms of up to 3 years. Critics argue that the laws threaten the right to protest. Meanwhile, 5 Just Stop Oil activists have been charged after being arrested for disrupting London's Pride March yesterday. They've been charged with behaviour likely to cause harassment, alarm or distress. 2 others were released on bail, pending further inquiries. The government says it is determined to stop migrant boats coming to Britain despite the legal setback. Ministers are preparing to appeal a court decision which blocked the deportation of asylum seekers to Rwanda. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says if nothing's done to stop the boats, the costs could spiral, reaching up to £11 billion.
I think your viewers want the government to take action. That is what we're doing. We're doing so in a way that clearly complies with the legal process. But it's important we now take this to the Supreme Court. The Prime Minister, the Home Secretary are determined to stop the boats. And if we don't, then there'd be a huge cost.
But Lord Carlisle, barrister and crossbench member of the House of Lords, says the proposal is unlawful.
Government is not upholding the law, and they've approached this whole bill in a completely legally non-compliant way. The basis of this bill is that there is a safe country or safe countries to send refugees to, but in fact they're only offering one safe country, and that's Rwanda. So the proposal is in tatters, it is unlawful, it is leading to people being kept in custody when they should not be kept in custody.
Labour says it would give teachers in England £2,400 to stop them leaving the profession. The party's promising £50 million a year to prevent what it calls an exodus, funded by ending tax breaks for private schools. Nearly 1 in 5 teachers who qualified in 2020 have since quit. Shadow Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson says the problem needs to be addressed.
For our new teachers, when they've completed their early career framework, when they finish those 2 years, they would then receive a retention payment at the end of that. The single biggest way that we make sure that children get really great outcomes and get a great start in life in school is through high quality teaching. And right now at the moment we face a recruitment and retention crisis across the profession. People are leaving teaching in their droves. 1 in 5 new teachers leave within the first couple of years. And that's why I believe it's absolutely essential that we address that.
And there's likely to be more disruption for rail passengers over the coming week. ASLEF members at 16 train companies in England will refuse to work overtime. Operators rely on that to run their full timetable. The union says it's calling for fair pay. The Rail Delivery Group says ASLEF rejected its last offer of a £5,000 raise, which would bring the basic salary for drivers working a 4-day week to nearly £65,000. Services will be affected from Monday to Saturday. More as it happens here on GB News, but now it's back to Emily.
Thank you, Aaron. Can I just read out one email that I just received because it's made me laugh? We were talking about positive discrimination before the break, and Ant's written in. He just says, hello. Straight white males are no longer required laughing emoji. No longer required laughing emoji. I didn't deliver that very well. It just made me chuckle. It does seem that way sometimes in particular recruitment services, processes anyway. But we're moving on to protest laws. New measures to crack down on disruptive protests came into force today, including an expansion of police powers and a new criminal offence of tunnelling. Authorities will now have powers to disperse static protests, a common tactic of groups like Just Stop Oil, Extinction Rebellion. Joining me now is GB News political reporter Catherine Forster. Catherine, thank you. Catherine, thank you very much indeed. You are in Westminster. These protest laws were very controversial. I imagine they remain so. What exactly is in the detail?
Yes, so the government have really lost patience with Just Stop Oil, Extinction Rebellion, etc. And of course, while the right to be able to peacefully protest is very important and something that, you know, we cherish rightly in this country, there is a fine line, isn't there? Because the disruption has been massive. We saw only yesterday Just Stop Oil disrupting the Pride March. Last week at the cricket, again, the Ashes were disrupted, the Grand National recently, and so often roads blocked, motorways brought to a standstill. So these measures that have come in today, two parts really. First of all, to give police far greater powers in tackling things like static protests, where people just basically plonk themselves down and will not move, and also tunnelling. Now, in the case of tunnelling, that's a new criminal offence as of today. If you are found of being present in a tunnel to cause serious disruption, you could be jailed for up to 3 years. And of course, it's only a couple of years ago since people tunnelled Euston Station against HS2. It did cause massive disruption. Now, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, is taking quite a tough line. She said the public have had enough of their lives being disrupted by selfish protesters. We will keep our roads and those hard-working people moving. The government think that they are on the right side of public opinion with this. They think that a lot of people are thoroughly fed up with the disruption. We remember, don't we, only a year or two ago, London bridges across the Thames were blocked by Extinction Rebellion. Ambulances that needed urgently to get people to hospital couldn't, and, you know, a potential threat to life. So the government will be thinking these measures are popular, and they will be hoping that the police will enforce them stringently.
Thank you very much indeed, Catherine Forster there, GB News political reporter, telling us all about these new anti-protest laws. With me in the studio, Darren Grimes and Aaron Bastani. Darren, the government says these measures will be popular. They hope these measures will be popular. Are they?
I think the British people are fundamentally a fair people, right? And they respect the right to protest. They respect, in any democracy as robust as our own, the right to do that should be respected and cherished within law. What they don't respect is some unwashed middle-class hippie sitting in front of the road, preventing ambulances getting from A to B, putting lives at risk, and preventing the day-to-day machinations of our everyday lives. So I fundamentally just can't understand why we haven't done any of these measures sooner, frankly, because I think Suella Braverman is probably the only cabinet minister who actually is in touch with what the British people are thinking and saying.
I'll come to Aaron in just one moment, but Darren, do you worry? OK, we may support these types of measures when it comes to groups like Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion, but what if these powers were used by a different government in the future and they were used to clamp down on something that we both wanted to go out and protest? Do you worry about that?
But I never think that it's proportionate to stand in the middle of the road and block an ambulance. So fundamentally, you know, I would probably support the government of the day, whatever colour it is, on saying that's the wrong thing to do. There are ways to protest.
It's never OK to aggressively use a tunnel.
To be honest with you, I'm not aware of the concept of tunnelling. Okay. You know, I thought that was a tunnel type experience, but not, you know.
Perhaps Aaron does. Perhaps you have experience of it. From 2nd of July today, being found guilty of tunnelling or being present in a tunnel to cause serious disruption could see people jailed for up to 3 years.
I mean, I find that ridiculous, frankly.
Why?
Well, there are people out there who are doing hit and runs. There's a story of a hit and run recently. Peter Dowd has a daughter. He's an MP, Labour MP. I'm only saying this because this is a case I know of.
Yeah.
His daughter worked for the NHS. There was a hit and run. She died. Chap was a dangerous driver, or maybe it was a young woman. I can't remember. They went to prison for about a year. They were back on the road again in 2 years. So they can take a life, and yet somebody in a...
Is that whataboutery?
No, somebody found in a tunnel gets 3 years. I don't think that's proportionate.
Potentially.
But what if they had been planning to, I don't know, I don't know what one does in a tunnel, but imagine it could be very disruptive.
Yeah, well, in a tunnel, I assume, especially in the case of HS2, you don't know what they could have done to the infrastructure that had been placed there. So it could be a national security issue.
But that's already covered by things like anti-terror legislation. That is a lot of this. That's what I'm not sure about. A lot of this is already covered. People are watching it saying, surely the police can stop that, they can arrest them, and they can. So I'm wondering why are these new offences being created?
It is a good point.
Very good point. Why do we need more laws on the statute book when it's already illegal to blockade a road last time I looked? So why do we need these powers? Is it just so the government can say, oh, we're doing this to clamp down on Just Stop Oil, and they think it will get them some points?
I think there's an element of that, but there's also an element of there being selective policing, in my view, where you've got two-tier policing where certain issues that you protest in, unlike lockdown, for example, are totally acceptable. And then when you're campaigning against nice and friendly green issues that all political parties support, well, that's A-OK. So I think the government have had to say to the police, we're putting through new legislation, this is now the law of the land, no more excuses, get to it and enforce the law.
Do you think the government, Aaron, might be worried that protests could increase in their regularity, considering the economic situation we've seen in other European countries, in Canada and the US, more and more people getting out onto the streets for one reason or another?
I think that's entirely right. I think the big picture here is, look, the legacy media loves to talk about how, we've had the return of the centre, Sunak, Starmer, everything's going back to normal. Your audience, your viewers, your listeners know things aren't going back to normal. They know that inflation's very high, interest rates are high. We have a lot of crises in this country. Darren said it earlier on, nothing's really functioning right now. That's not a party political point. And by the way, for Labour, if they come in 2024, that's going to be very hard to rectify, whatever you think of them. So I think that, yes, we're going to see a massive upturn in protest. I think that's inevitable. When you've got food inflation at 20%, I'm surprised it hasn't already come, frankly. And your point earlier about, well, what if there was protests in the future which you agreed with? Would you still back it? That is so important. For me personally, I don't support fox hunting. But if somebody wanted to change the law in regard to fox hunting and they stopped traffic or they were in a tunnel, I don't think they should be facing 3 years in prison. I think that's disproportionate. It's a waste of taxpayer money because 3 years in prison is quite pricey.
But Aaron, what if your pregnant wife, for example, was trying to get to hospital and someone's on the road protesting against fox hunting? I imagine you'd have a few things to say about that then.
Not to personalise it.
But that's when you try and generate legislation, you don't talk about things in an emotive way, do you? You try and make a general rule for everyone, most places, most of the time. I don't think 3 years is proportionate and fair.
It's a very difficult one. It is an extremely difficult one because I do see a scenario, for example, during the pandemic, there were many people who wanted to protest against lockdowns. Police have to enforce the law. I think your point on selective policing is a very strong one. I remember when the Black Lives Matter protesters were pretty much left alone, despite them being against
Well, you had coppers taking the knee.
Pardon?
You had coppers taking the knee.
Well, exactly. So it does need to be, first and foremost, the law does need to apply equally, fairly, and without prejudice on all of us. Otherwise, no one will trust the police, no one will trust the law. That's all we've got time for on that one. But moving on, lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on hundreds of miles of overhead cables and pylons. They're expected to be fast-tracked. That's for net zero targets. There's a lot of local opposition. Are you for the pylons or against the pylons? Sean from Cheshire has got in touch. He says, I'm a Conservative voter, and regardless of what people think about net zero, moving to renewables with a diverse energy mix is the only path to energy independence and eradicating our reliance on foreign gas. You make a good point there. We are importing far too much of our gas, and as we've seen, Putin is very much able to manipulate the price of that. Stephen's written in. He says, in the northeast, as Darren will confirm, pylons and cables are not the answer. Remember the storm that saw parts without power for days due to high winds? Good job we had a gas range and a wood burner. Well, yes, if things go pear-shaped, you have to rely on what's natural to us, or the wood at least. Carol says, living in Norfolk, we are known for the 3 Ps, pigs, planes and pylons. We've also had a new electric station built. Well, thanks for letting us know. Very nice local intel there. Keep your views coming in. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter. We're at GB News. You are, of course, watching and listening to GB News Sunday with me, Emily Carver. We've got plenty more coming up on today's show. High energy bills, rising mortgage payments are just some of the many factors forcing households to withdraw their hard-earned savings. Remember when we were talking about people saving and saving during lockdown? It looks like we're all starting to spend those savings. I'm asking, is the UK running out of money? Simple question. All of that and more to come. I'm Emily Carver. You're watching and listening to GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. We're looking at rain or showers the next few days. There'll be some bright or sunny spells. Rather chilly, but it does start to warm up later in the week. And we can see with the bigger picture, low pressure sat to the northeast of the UK. We've got a cool northwesterly breeze, quite gusty around the coasts and outbreaks of showery rain pushing across the country too. So to end the day, we do have showers across the northern half of the UK. Some of these still heavy, some more persistent rain moving from Orkney into the mainland northern parts of Scotland here. Clearer spells overnight developing further south, but still some scattered showers moving in, and temperatures for most of us tonight holding up in double figures. So a brighter start Monday morning compared to Sunday. Yes, we'll already have showers across the north and the west. This spell of heavier, more persistent rain will slowly push its way eastward. Some uncertainty with the exact positioning of this, but we could see some heavy downpours and some rumbles of thunder within that. To the south, generally quite cloudy, some sunny spells, but also scattered showers. Showers further north too, and then this rain still continuing to sink south across Scotland, and for many, quite a chilly afternoon. Temperatures generally the high teens to very low 20s. Further showers to end Monday. This rain starting to fragment a little bit, but still pushing southwards across Scotland with further showers behind it. And then overnight into Tuesday morning, perhaps some more persistent rain moving into southern parts of England. Much needed rain across this part of the world. Temperatures generally again holding up in double figures. So a cloudy, wet start across southern counties of England and Wales likely on Tuesday morning. Some heavy bursts possible as this system slowly pushes its way southeastwards, followed by sunshine and showers for the rest of the day. Further showers and rain on Wednesday, but perhaps drier and warmer by Thursday.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Yes, welcome back. You're watching and listening to GB News Sunday with me, Emily Carver, on your TV, online and digital radio. Now, I saw a story in the papers this week that shocked me. The UK seems to be, it could be, cashless. Families are flocking to withdraw their funds. Britons are pulling money out of their savings accounts at the fastest rate ever recorded. New data highlights how people in the UK have accumulated £101 billion worth of debt since the start of 2023. Household budgets are stretched, of course, to battle the rising cost of living. So who better to talk to than Dr. Roger Gavolb, former advisor to the Bank of England and the UK Treasury. Now, some of the statistics I've read about the amount of money that people are withdrawing from their accounts is quite shocking, actually, because during the pandemic, quite a lot of middle-class people who kept their jobs working at home managed to accrue quite a lot of savings. Are we now spending those savings?
Not necessarily. I mean, first of all, thank you very much. It's lovely to be back here, and I feel I feel really at home. I should perhaps be in the middle of these chaps because, I mean, you know, I'm a consumer champion, a people's champion, and where I belong is in between these two illustrious bookends. So I feel really comfortable.
You're the filling in the sandwich.
No, I'm the midway point, you know, between the two of them. Yeah, I think one has to be careful about statements quite as sweeping as that. There's been about, well, if their figures are to be believed, because they aren't always, the Bank of England announced £4.6 billion withdrawn from savings in the month of May. But I think we need to remember that a lot of that is people paying down debt and mortgages and credit cards and other things because interest rates have risen so high. So they're not spending it and they're not cashless. They're just they're shaking off some of that debt because it's unnecessarily, in my view, become so expensive. But yes, we are spending a lot. 45% of people with mortgages, according to a study by one of the debt charities, if I recall it's Step Change, are having trouble meeting bills. And 4% of the entire British public, that's 68 million of us, are going to run out of money by the end of this year.
Well, there we go. People are running out of money. So it's not just paying down credit cards and debt payments and mortgage payments. People are being left with less and less and less at the end of the month.
And I hasten to add that those numbers were before the last interest rate rise, the 13th.
Well, you've been very vocal about what you think of the Bank of England's decision to hike those interest rates again. You think it's the wrong decision and is having, well, devastating impacts, could have devastating impacts.
Yes, I've been saying this since the first rate rise. What we have is non-consumer driven inflation. We're not spending. People are choosing between heating and eating, aren't they? We're not overspending. It's not like the States where they have a $1.7 trillion of money under the mattress from the pandemic. We don't have anywhere near as much. And they do have consumer spending, and they have raised interest rates, and it has more than halved the inflation to less than 5%. Here, ours hasn't dropped at all. It just keeps going up. And the Bank of England simply is now stuck in such a rut they can't admit it. What you do with this kind of inflation, which is called cost push, is let it run itself out, because it comes from fuel and energy supplies and services. And indeed, food prices are dropping, fuel prices, energy costs are dropping. It runs itself out. In 2009, we had the same thing almost, and the Bank of England did not raise interest rates. But to do it 13 times is so out of touch, it's so insane, and the damage it's done to the property market, generation rent, the rental market, the bank of mom and dad, it's been devastating, and we haven't even seen the effects from this 13th rise. It's totally insane. I understand that Andrew Bailey is actually holding secret meetings with Stop Oil because he's under such criticism now that he's trying to learn how to glue himself to his chair at the Bank of England.
Breaking news there. I'll have to fact check that one in the break, Roger. I'm not sure that's true. But, you know, he is in a sticky situation. So there you go.
I better take that one sitting down.
Aaron, let's bring you in on this because we were just discussing in the break, weren't we, how the UK... We always talk about how we're one of the biggest economies in the world and that, you know, people want to come here from all across the world to make a living and improve their lives. But are we actually a poor country masquerading as a rich one?
My view is that you take out the southeast of England, you take out London, the M25, we're in many parts of the country, we're a middle-income country. You know, I was in Poland late last year and... Frankly, many of their larger towns, smaller cities, feel more affluent than what we have here in the UK.
Really?
Very striking. You go to places like Krakow, Poznan, Katowice, they feel wealthier than places like Leeds or Newcastle. Just an observation, purely anecdotal, but that's how it feels, and some of the numbers back it up. In terms of this data, I mean, is it a surprise when you've got the average savings rate is around 2.37%, but the average mortgage is 6.37%? So you've got no incentives to save. As we've already heard, you obviously have to spend a lot of money too. And this is really counterproductive on the workings of the Bank of England themselves, because one of the reasons why you increase interest rates, I agree it's a stupid thing to do, is you obviously want to quell consumer demand. One way of doing that is, of course, you incentivise more people to save because they'll find a higher return on their savings because savings rates go up, but they're not going up. So we're in a really bad situation. And even though the Bank of England's done this with interest rates, it's not feeding through to savers. A real mess is being made of the whole situation, frankly.
Darren, you were itching to come in.
I think even if the banks, Aaron, raised interest rates on savings to 10%, that people wouldn't have savings to pop in their savings accounts, right?
It's
That's
one
the
penny
problem.
up by 10%, isn't it a lot, is it?
Do you know, where I do agree with Aaron is that actually we need more houses to be built, right? Ultimately, you're not going to bring down mortgage rates and actually increase the supply if we don't actually do that, because demand is through the roof. And many marginal landlords are just saying, I'm off. This is not working for me at all. I'm not making any money from this. Goodbye. And renters in London especially are saying, uh-oh, what am I going to do now? And then there are two really quick points. Lockdown, I don't think we're being honest about the extent to which that has made us poor, right? That with the vast sums of borrowing, 100% of GDP, in large part, thanks to lockdown. Second point, America isn't in the same boat that we're in because America has energy independence. I'm afraid we're far too often listening to the likes of Aaron and saying we need more windmills and solar panels when actually we need what works, and that is gas, oil, and dare I say, nuclear and coal.
Is windmill the derogatory term for a wind turbine?
I don't think we can call them anything else.
Roger, I want to come back to you, but I don't have time. Gutted. We'll speak again very soon. Thank you very much indeed for coming into the studio this afternoon. You're watching and listening to GB News Sunday at Home with me, Emily Carver. We've got lots more coming up on today's show. Rishi Sunak says he fundamentally disagrees with the Court of Appeal. It's ruled against the Rwanda asylum plan, of course. Will one of the Prime Minister's 5 key pledges to stop the boat crossings ever see the light of day? But first, let's get the news with Aaron Armstrong.
Thank you, Emily. Just after 2:30 here in the GB newsroom. The French government will hold emergency talks to address the ongoing civil unrest after a 5th night of rioting with violent clashes in Marseille. More than 700 people were arrested yesterday following looting and demonstrations in a number of other cities, and almost 2,500 arrests have been made since Tuesday. The riots began when police shot and killed teenager Nahel Merzouk during a traffic stop in a suburb of Paris. Police will have new powers to deal with environmental activists. Those will come into force today. They'll have a greater ability to move on static protests, and demonstrators could be charged with the new criminal offence of tunnelling. That is, being present in a tunnel to cause disruption, and that could result in up to 3 years in jail. Home Secretary Suella Braverman says the new measures are necessary to deal with what she's described as mayhem on the streets. Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion say it threatens their right to protest. Labour says it would introduce a new package of reforms to tackle an exodus of teachers from the profession. The plans would include an incentive payment of £2,400 for each teacher as part of a £50 million a year pledge that will be funded by ending tax breaks for private schools. Teacher vacancies have doubled in the past 2 years, with more than 40,000 leaving last year alone, and 1 in 5 who qualified in 2020 having since quit. Rail passengers are facing further disruption over the next week. ASLEF members at 16 train companies in England will refuse to work overtime, which operators rely on to run their full timetable. The union says it's calling for fair pay, but the rail delivery group says ASLEF rejected its last offer of £5,000, the raise that is, which would bring the basic salary for drivers working a 4-day week to nearly £65,000. Services will be affected from Monday to Saturday. More on all of our stories available on our website and more in our later bulletins.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions, and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio, and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Welcome back to GB News Sunday with me, Emily Carver, on your TV and radio. So, Rishi Sunak promises to fight back. That's after the Court of Appeal, the judges within it, rejected government plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda to have their claims processed, ruling it could not be treated as a safe third country. Opponents of the policy argue the UK risks sending people for refuge to a nation that doesn't protect the rights of its political opponents. Well, the Prime Minister said while he respects the Court of Appeal, he fundamentally disagrees with its conclusion. Who's right? Joining me now is international human rights lawyer David Haig and Executive Director of Migration Watch, Dr. Mike Jones. Mike, I'll start with you. Was the Court of Appeal right or wrong in your view?
I respect the decision, but ultimately they're wrong. I agree with the judgment of the High Court. Essentially, they've argued that the Rwanda plan violates Article 3 of the Convention of Human Rights. That is, it puts asylum seekers in danger of being deported to a country where they could be, tortured or humiliated in some other way. But, as Law Burnett points out, this is simply false. The vast majority of these people don't have passports. They will be sent to Rwanda with British documents, and Rwanda does not have bilateral agreements with these countries. They cannot deport the asylum seekers. If they reject their applications, they cannot deport them to countries where they're tortured or persecuted. So, for me, it's a wrong decision, completely.
For you, it doesn't add up. David, do you think it's right? You're an international human rights lawyer. Do you think it's right that two judges can make a decision that potentially completely blows apart Rishi Sunak's plan, the government's policy, one of their flagship policies? Do you think that's right?
Good afternoon, Emily. I think what we've got to look at, the system, the law that there is at the moment that is put this in place, that the judge's job is that they're looking at whether or not this policy breaches that law. That law in itself was put in by previous politicians when we look at what we're looking at. So do I think it's right? It's the system that we have. And yes, I think it's right that they do that. It would be the same for any law in any case. And that's the situation that we have. And it's very interesting earlier on when you were mentioning Rishi Sunak saying that he fundamentally disagrees with the findings. But if we all remember back to April when this policy was put in place, Suella Braverman at the time said that she could not guarantee that this would not breach existing laws. So why are the government putting in place policies that at the beginning they must have known were breaching these laws and would end up in the courts?
But Mike, does the law then need to be changed? If the government can't fulfil its promise to the people to control borders, does the law need to change? Do you think there's a real chance that we could have a serious political debate about leaving the ECHR? Of course, the judge's ruling at the Court of Appeal was based on a breach of Article 3.
Hopefully. Obviously, the European Convention on Human Rights is embedded within the Human Rights Act. We've been members of the European Court of Human Rights before the Human Rights Act. So my hope is that we can have a serious debate on the Human Rights Act, amend it, abolish it, replace it with a British Bill of Rights. My personal view is I think that's a great policy avenue to go down. I'd also support us withdrawing from the Council of Europe, which would make the Supreme Court the ultimate authority, not the European Court of Human Rights. So yes, the legal architecture in the UK needs to be reformed. And the Conservatives have been in power for a very long time, and they haven't really taken this matter seriously. They've put the cart before the horse. They've introduced this Rwanda plan, and I think it could work. You need the legal architecture there to implement it.
Sorry to interrupt. Just David, lastly, what would happen if the government didn't listen to the courts, ignored their ruling, and just went with the deportations? What would happen?
Well, that's something I considered actually when I heard the language coming out of the number 10, and that's something which I think would be very worrying, because we have the rule of law in this country, and when you have a government, and this is at the moment, this is our domestic law, because as Mike mentioned, this is the law that it relates to from the European Court of Human Rights is in English law at the moment. So we can't blame this on European judges. We in the past, we Brits passed this. So if we then have another government ignoring the laws that a previous one passed, where does that end up? And I think that would be a very, very slippery, dangerous slope to go down. But it's one that I think that they probably are considering.
I just think a lot of British people, and of course people have very different views about this, but I think a lot of British people are watching this and thinking, here we go again, the courts are trying to dictate what our government can do. We wanted control of our borders and it's not being done. But we'll talk again. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Mike Jones, Director of Migration Watch there, and international human rights lawyer David Haig. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. So my panel, I want to get your views on this. Aaron, do you think this Rwanda scheme is deeply immoral, horrendous? We can't process people in Rwanda. It's an awful country. People are saying rather nasty things about Rwanda. I heard from people who actually live there, it's actually quite a nice place.
Would you move there?
No.
So...
But I'm not an asylum seeker fleeing persecution.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. I've never been. So I think you're right to say you shouldn't really judge somebody if you've not met them. I'm not going to judge Rwanda having not been there. I mean, I don't know. I presume it's quite nice to go on safari or something. I mean... But
we've got football clubs advertising it, don't you?
Yeah,
on their shirts.
But,
Arsenal, yeah.
But in terms of this policy, I don't back it for a number of reasons. Firstly, because of cost, and I think secondly, even the Tories don't think this is going to happen. And I think they knew it wasn't going to happen all along. I think they knew the courts were going to...
Do you think?
I think so.
I think they really want it to happen.
I think, well, if it happens, great. But I think this point that was being made by your guest a moment ago about the HRC, the Human Rights Act, I think that is... There are very few Hail Marys right now that the Tories have if they want to win the next general election. I think one is the idea of judges obstructing democratically mandated policy, and another one is migration. And I think this policy brings those two together, this issue, rather, of the Rwanda resettlement programme.
It's a very real concern, though, isn't it? The courts, people do view lawyers as being activists.
Because, I mean, a lot of people are saying, look, I voted Leave to ensure that the UK was the ultimate authority about decisions like this. Now, that's clearly not the case when you've got the ECHR being used to actually, in the appeal court, to say we can't have the Rwanda plan. Fundamentally, and I'm going to say something that's probably going to, make people come out and hide. But I just don't care. If you come here and you throw your passport overseas, you are not our problem. The British taxpayer should not have to put people up in better accommodation than they're putting up the armed forces. As I said earlier, a broadcaster reported that actually military families have been given 1 week's notice because we need to build accommodation for these people that are coming here illegally. I think that's a damn disgrace. So I don't care if it's Rwanda, I don't care if it's Mars. Britain cannot be the end destination for everybody that wants to come here as an economic migrant, and that's what's being done.
Aaron, do you disagree with anything of that?
Mars might be somewhat more expensive than Rwanda, even though its costs are spiralling. Look, the issue here is the HRC. And that's very powerful rhetoric Darren's offering. But the question is, do we leave it or do we keep with it? Do we have the Human Rights Act? 1 second. Well, here's the thing. You have, on Saturdays, you have Calvin talk about this teacher was fired because of this, because of their religious views, their personal views, etc. Do you know what legislation they always use when they try and fire off their letters and their court cases to the schools and their education authorities?
Well, a lot of the gender critical, it's the Equality Act.
A lot of it's... Well, no, actually, Conservatives are appealing to the Human Rights Act and the Equalities Act because it defends them too.
So what you're saying is we like the ECHR when it suits us,
yes.
But when it comes to the Rwanda plan, it doesn't suit.
I think Conservatives use the ECHR and HRA non-stop. This idea that it only helps people on the left or only helps
immigrants.
And
then it's been used to stop deporting terrorists, for example.
Well, that's true.
Which is absurd.
Presumably, we have it in us as a nation to be able to make judgments on our own human rights policy.
But this was a British court. This was, first of all, the Human Rights Act is British legislation.
They used a breach of Article 3 of the ECHR in order to say that Rwanda is unsafe. So it does come back to the ECHR. And that's why I'm asking about the court.
But this gentleman's saying that the highest court of appeal shouldn't be the European court. That's fine. This was a British court. So I think that point is kind of moot. These were British judges. Now, you can say they're interpreting quasi-European law. Fine. But look, I think once people actually read about what the European Convention on Human Rights is, the Human Rights Act is, I think most people would say it's pretty quite sensible. I'm really worried we actually get rid of a broadly sensible piece of legislation because of some of the issues you're talking about.
But do you know what? What frustrates me about this conversation is that people are so quick to say the Rwanda plan is a nonsense, it's racist, it's bigoted, you know, blah, 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 X, Y, and Z reason why we think this policy shouldn't go ahead. They never offer a solution to stop the boats. They just say, oh, well, we'll just have a bit more cooperation with our European partners. Not working, is it?
Can I offer a solution for one country?
OK, very quickly. But,
Iran. We have a policy in this country of hyperinflation in Iran. We have sanctions in that country to economically destroy it. Then when people leave that country to come here, we say, where are they coming from? Why are they coming? Well, it's British policy to strangle Iran's economy. Stop the sanctions, stop the occupations, stop wars abroad, and then maybe we have a better argument.
It's not our fault that people have found that they do not wish to live in the countries of their origin.
We're sanctioning that country to destroy its economy.
We can't be to blame for the reason why people are moving.
If Britain drops sanctions, then I think they have a much stronger position to say, sorry, we're not accepting Iranian migrants. When your policy is to cause hyperinflation in a country, sadly, that does create responsibility.
Well, I don't buy that, because if you look at one of the biggest cohorts recently, it's been India.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, India is not a country that's war-torn, and it
has poverty, of course it does. And people may be better off here
but a lot of places,
in a rural town in
there
India.
Are millions of people, Emily, who would love to come to Britain. I've no doubt about it.
I don't doubt that.
There absolutely is. For economic benefit, but economic betterment. And I don't doubt that. But I do think that we've got to say there are so many crises in this country, healthcare, housing, energy, all the rest of it. How the hell are we expecting to actually supply all these people with these essential services?
There's also the question, of course, I think only a handful of people seem to get deported every year. So it seems like once you do arrive on UK shores, there's not much hope of deporting you if you aren't a legitimate asylum seeker. It all sounds very harsh words, but I'm sorry, a country without borders isn't a country in my view. So we will move on. Let me know what you think about that conversation. I thought it was a good one. Finally, now this is an interesting story, I think. There has been growing interest in a 4-day working week. We know this in the UK and around the world. Some businesses are praising the shift due to an increase in productivity, they say, but a Liberal Democrat-run council behind Britain's first 4-day week has been ordered to call off their trial because the scheme could be in breach of the Local Government Act. Whoops, it's been revealed South Cambridgeshire Council gave staff an extra day off every week while paying them full salaries in a 3-month test run and plan to extend the trial. But now it's been given the chop. And apparently all local councils have now been advised that they can't move to a 4-day week. Aaron, is this a bit authoritarian? Should councils be allowed to work 4-day weeks on the same money?
I think that local government should be able to experiment and try new things because that's how ultimately you progress and you find if something works or doesn't work. And I think this is really daft, frankly. You know, experimentation is the engine of progress. So the fact that, you know, central government thinks it's got all the answers and telling them what to do. Or disaster. Well, it could be precisely. You learn through mistakes. To have a good idea, you have to have a bad idea first. But, you know, the idea that central government has all the answers, well, I don't think that's quite the case if you look at how the country's being run. So, yeah, a bit more experimentation. I don't think we'll go amiss.
So I was on Question Time in Liverpool about a year ago, which wasn't my audience. Anyway, it was a bit of a tricky evening. Anyway, but when I was there were local people who worked in the local council who were in the audience, and they were absolutely adamant that the government shouldn't be telling them to get back in the office. I can do my work from home. It's much better for my life. I'm an adult, blah, blah, blah. Do you think that maybe... Which way do you go? Do you go for this is a good experiment, or do you go for the lazy people working in local councils need to do better?
I mean, anyone being told, look, we're going to give you a day off. I mean, how are we going to turn around to doctors, for example, and say to them, I want you to see 25% more patients within a 4-day working week? How on earth are they going to do that, especially at this current time? It's impossible. So this is nonsense stuff. It's typical socialist, nutty ideas. And ultimately, if you're a council taxpayer and your council tax is going up, which it is, the Taxpayers Alliance say in England they've more than tripled to £2,000 since being introduced 30 years ago. So people are saying, hang on a minute, what am I paying you for? Back in the office, you lazy lout.
You lazy lout. I'm sure you've never been called that before.
Never,
Okay, well prepared
never.
with your stats from the Taxpayers Alliance. Good stuff. Yes, I don't know, but I think the issue was that people weren't actually getting their services.
Absolutely.
And that's the key point here. It's all very well for a private company to experiment with 4-day working weeks, but when it's the taxpayer being impacted and not being able to, I don't know, get in touch about their bin collection that hasn't happened, then it's a little bit more serious. But let's see what you have to say at home. You've been getting in touch on with your thoughts on the Court of Appeal judge's ruling that the plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda is unlawful. Kez has written in, she says, the only thing the legal system cares about is the massive amount of our money they are milking by representing migrants. Yes, it is quite a big industry. There's a lot of money to be made, but also there's the question over legal aid as well. Jack says, they decided Rwanda was not a safe country now, so no claimants could be sent there. But if no claimants are ever sent there, how can that ever be tested? Yes, I'm not sure there's one perfect country that gets absolutely, you know, the entirety of the asylum process absolutely perfect. Why shouldn't it be Rwanda? Marilyn has to say the only people who would be sent to Rwanda are those who enter the UK without permission. So my advice to all that want to claim asylum is to do so legally and wait. No one goes to Rwanda if they abide by our laws. The counter to that would be there aren't enough safe and legal routes. Anyway, thank you for sending in those views. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter. We're at GB News. That's it from me today. But we have Nana Akweer here in the studio for a handover. Tell us what you've got on.
Well,
you look lovely, by the way.
Thank you very much. So do you. I was quite envious of that colour that you're wearing.
Thank you. Yes, bright red.
I'll be wearing that next week. But on my show, I've got to say, I've got a very, very, very exciting tennis star. Now, she won Wimbledon in 1977.
Wow.
Because Wimbledon starts tomorrow, so that's why she's going to be on. She is British. She is incredible. She was ranked as high as #2 in the world in the singles and #1 in the world doubles. So she'll be live on my show at 5 o'clock. You've got to guess who she is. I don't like to give too much away.
Fantastic. That sounds amazing. I'll definitely be tuning in. You at home, of course, have been watching and listening to GB News Sunday with me, Emily Carver. Thank you very much to Aaron Bastani and Darren Grimes for being such a fantastic panel. Don't go anywhere, though. Nana is up next. But first, before that, let's take a look at the weather with Greg.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. We're looking at rain or showers the next few days. There'll be some bright or sunny spells. Rather chilly, but it does start to warm up later in the week. And we can see with the bigger picture, low pressure sat to the northeast of the UK. We've got a cool northwesterly breeze, quite gusty around the coasts and outbreaks of showery rain pushing across the country too. So to end the day, we do have showers across the northern half of the UK, some of these still heavy, some more persistent rain moving from Orkney into the mainland northern parts of Scotland here. Clearer spells overnight developing further south, but still some scattered showers moving in and temperatures for most of us tonight holding up in double figures. So a brighter start Monday morning compared to Sunday. Yes, we'll already have showers across the north and the west. This spell of heavier, more persistent rain will slowly push its way eastward. Some uncertainty with the exact positioning of this, but we could see some heavy downpours and some rumbles of thunder within that. To the south, generally quite cloudy, some sunny spells, but also scattered showers. Showers further north too, and then this rain still continuing to sink south across Scotland, and for many, quite a chilly afternoon. Temperatures generally the high teens to very low 20s. Further showers to end Monday. This rain starting to fragment a little bit, but still pushing southwards across Scotland with further showers behind it. And then overnight into Tuesday morning, perhaps some more persistent rain moving into southern parts of England. Much needed rain across this part of the world. Temperatures generally again holding up in double figures. So a cloudy, wet start across southern counties of England and Wales likely on Tuesday morning. Some heavy bursts possible as this system slowly pushes its way southeastwards, followed by sunshine and showers for the rest of the day. Further showers and rain on Wednesday, but perhaps drier and warmer by Thursday.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and on